The conference room crackled with tension as 20 polished lawyers sat in rows of mahogany chairs, eyes fixed on the lone intern at the head of the table. Marcus, 24, black, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, stood with trembling hands gripping a stack of papers. The senior partners barely concealed their disinterest, sipping coffee and whispering between themselves. Marcus said, "I believe there's constitutional precedent here if we redefine the client's exposure under 14th Amendment grounds." Silence followed. Then came a low chuckle. Robert Hensley, 52, white, gray-suited and smug, leaned back and said, "That's adorable, son. Have you even read Marbury v. Madison?" The room erupted in laughter. Marcus swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. He wasn't just dismissed, he was humiliated. "This isn't moot court," Hensley said, waving him off. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the legal titans who had just turned him into a punchline. No one defended him. The moment seared itself into his memory. His jaw clenched as he gathered his papers, nodding tightly. He walked back to his seat, but something had shifted. This wasn't the end of his idea, it was the beginning. Outside the glass-walled room, Marcus stood alone in the corridor, shoulders rigid as muffled laughter echoed from inside. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath. His mind replayed every second of that humiliation like a broken record. He thought of his late mother who once said, "The world will try to break you with its laughter, just don't let it become your silence." The hallway stretched empty, corporate artwork lining the walls like reminders of who this space was made for. Marcus straightened his tie, his reflection staring back from the glass, defeated, but not destroyed. He walked down the hall, each step slow, controlled, deliberate. If they wouldn't believe in him, he'd make the law believe. He muttered under his breath, "You laughed at the wrong one today." His eyes were no longer filled with fear, they burned with a quiet fire. He disappeared around the corner, unnoticed, but the storm had already begun within. In the building's rooftop courtyard, Marcus leaned against a railing, overlooking the city skyline. The sun bore down, but the breeze offered relief. He took out his notebook, flipping to a page labeled Equal Protection Theory, Alternate Path. His pen moved furiously. He sketched case precedents, arguments, counterpoints, building the bones of a case they had dismissed in seconds. His mind was aflame, not with anger, but precision. Every detail mattered. If Hensley wanted war, Marcus would bring the Constitution to the battlefield. The city hummed below, unaware that on this rooftop, something was being born. Not just an argument. A legal revolution. And no partner could stop it. He looked up from his notes, eyes locked on the horizon. "Landmark or nothing," he whispered. Down in the firm's law library, Marcus scanned shelves rapidly, pulling out thick volumes of constitutional law, casebooks, and journals. He dropped them on a reading table, the thud echoing. A younger paralegal paused, watching him with curiosity, but said nothing. Marcus flipped pages at lightning speed, eyes scanning lines like a machine. He scribbled notes, highlighted key precedents, his brain assembling a structure from chaos. Hours passed, unnoticed. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. Somewhere behind him, partners walked by, oblivious. To them, he was invisible. But that invisibility was his weapon. In the quiet corners of law, he was constructing a weapon they wouldn't see coming. Late at night, Marcus stood outside the firm, city lights flickering behind him. The office tower loomed above like a monument to arrogance. He stared up at the windows of the conference room, where it all happened. His reflection in the building's glass stared back, tired but unbroken. He took out his phone, recorded a voice memo. August 5th. They laughed. "I'll make the law echo louder." Then, silence. He turned and walked away. From this point on, he wasn't just chasing validation. He was chasing history. Marcus stepped into his apartment, a small studio on the city's edge, barely enough space for his books and dreams. The worn hardwood floors creaked as he dropped his bag, exhaustion settling into his bones. His walls were lined with sticky notes, books stacked from floor to windowsill, case law scribbled in marker on an old whiteboard. He opened the fridge. Empty, except for leftovers and a bottle of water. Still in his suit, he sank into the couch and pulled out a photo from under a legal pad. His mother in her scrubs, smiling arm around a younger Marcus on graduation day. "I'm not backing down, Ma," he whispered. Her memory burned in him like a promise. He pulled his laptop close and opened his notes, his fingers typing again, building, refining. It wasn't just about law. It was about every time someone like him was told they didn't belong. He wasn't chasing justice for the firm. He was chasing it for the ones who'd never step inside those glass buildings. His purpose had roots, and those roots were deeper than anyone in that boardroom could see. The next morning, Marcus met his grandmother at a quiet diner in Southside. Her territory, her rhythm, the kind of place where time moved slower and people remembered your name. Miss Lillian, 78, silver hair wrapped in a scarf, sharp eyes behind glasses, greeted him with a hug and a hard look. "You got that storm face again," she said. He smiled faintly, trying to deflect. "They laughed at me," he admitted. She didn't flinch. "Then make them remember the sound." They talked over grits and eggs, but beneath it all was legacy. She'd seen the marches, felt the fire hoses, buried her brother for daring to vote. She reminded Marcus of who he came from: survivors, fighters, architects of change. "You ain't walking into their world, you're remaking it," she said, gripping his hand. Her words didn't comfort. They commanded. And Marcus didn't just leave with a full belly. He left with armor. Back at the firm, Marcus sat silently in a side office, no bigger than a closet, tucked behind rows of bustling paralegals and associates. The sound of keyboards echoed like rain. He reviewed case after case, dissecting every word. A junior associate named Priya, 29, Indian American, sharp, observant, paused outside his door. "Still grinding?" she asked, stepping in with a quiet respect. "Trying to prove I'm not a joke," he said. She nodded. "Then stop hiding like one." She dropped a casebook on his desk. "Read page 132. You're not as alone as you think." She left without waiting for thanks. When he opened the book, his eyes widened. A parallel case. One that hadn't made it to trial, but held the same DNA as his theory. He whispered, "You've been here the whole time," to the pages. The foundation was shifting. He wasn't just chasing justice now. He was uncovering buried truth. That evening, Marcus sat on a bus heading home, city lights flickering outside the rain-speckled windows. He held the casebook in one hand, flipping back and forth between annotations and his own notes. Around him, the bus was quiet, mostly blue-collar riders, worn hands, tired eyes, silent prayers whispered into the city's night. He looked up from the book, studying the faces around him. This was who he was fighting for. Not the firm. Not the partners. But these people, the forgotten. He mouthed phrases to himself, practicing arguments like spoken word, testing tone and rhythm, cadence and logic. In that dim, humming vessel of steel and hope, he wasn't just memorizing legal code, he was rehearsing a revolution. One page at a time. One ride at a time. The law wasn't a weapon until you learned to wield it. And Marcus was learning fast. Marcus arrived home and immediately set up his phone to record. In the quiet of his room, he faced the camera like a mirror. "Day 7, he began. "They still don't see me. But that's fine. I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to be undeniable." He read parts of his theory aloud, his voice stronger with each sentence. He stumbled once, then corrected himself, sharper the second time. His rhythm built. Not robotic, but alive. Conviction, growing like a drum beat. He didn't care if no one watched these recordings. They weren't for the firm. They were for him. Proof that he was building something. That every hour mattered. That when the time came, he'd be ready. And when he finished the final line, he didn't smile. He just nodded. The fire in his eyes was no longer flickering. It was roaring. The printer in the firm's sub-basement clattered late into the night as Marcus pulled freshly printed documents from the tray, each one meticulously highlighted and tabbed. These weren't just case files, they were ammunition. His legal theory had evolved, cross-referenced with obscure state cases and federal interpretations no one in the firm had touched in years. He paused only when he heard a door creak behind him. Priya stepped in quietly, eyes wide at the stack on the table. This is insane, she whispered. No, Marcus said, tapping the top folder. This is real. She hesitated, then placed her own case file next to his. Then let's make them listen. In that dim room of old equipment and forgotten files, something dangerous was being born, a case too bold to ignore, too precise to mock. Marcus looked up, his eyes steady. No more theory, he said. We're writing history. The next morning, Marcus entered the firm's war room, a glass-walled strategy hub, reserved for high-level casework, his binder clutched tightly. Empty for now, it wouldn't be for long. He spread out the documents, aligning each page with military precision. On the wall-mounted whiteboard, he sketched out a flowchart connecting due process, equal protection, and a rarely used Supreme Court footnote. The door opened. One of the younger partners, Angela Rivera, Latina, 37, paused at the threshold, puzzled. What's this? She asked. A ghost case, Marcus replied. One no one wanted to touch. Angela walked in, scanning his chart. You're onto something. Her voice was low, cautious, but intrigued. If this works. Marcus finished her sentence. It changes everything. And for the first time, someone with power didn't laugh. She leaned closer. Prove it. That word, prove, hit Marcus like fuel. He wasn't knocking anymore. He was kicking the door down. Whispers started to spread in the corridors. An intern was building a case behind closed doors. Paralegals exchanged glances. Associates lingered longer by Marcus' door. Hensley caught wind of it one morning while sipping espresso. What's this noise about the intern playing law, Professor? He scoffed to a colleague. That afternoon, he confronted Marcus in front of 3 others. Still chasing fairy tales. Hensley sneered. Or is this some diversity showcase stunt? The air turned ice cold. Marcus stared at him, face unreadable. It's law, sir, whether you believe in it or not. Hensley stepped forward, clearly irritated. You think reading a few books gives you insight? You don't understand how this firm works. I understand how justice works, Marcus replied, voice steady. The room fell silent. For the first time, Hensley didn't have a comeback. Just a glare. And behind him, one associate nodded subtly. Momentum was shifting. Marcus stood before the firm's research committee. A rare invitation for someone of his title. The long table was lined with skeptical faces, each more senior than the last. Angela sat beside him, arms crossed, signaling silent support. He began his presentation, voice calm, deliberate. He walked them through the legal theory, precedent connections, and the societal implications. Charts lit up on the monitor. This isn't just legal logic, he said. It's constitutional relevance, ignored for decades. Halfway through, someone interrupted. Are you proposing this be taken to court? I'm proposing it be taken seriously. Marcus shot back. Silence followed. One partner leaned forward. What do you call this theory? Marcus hesitated only a second. Restorative due process. They murmured. Some skeptical, some impressed. Angela looked at him, then spoke softly. Welcome to the conversation. And just like that, the doors began to creak open. That night, Marcus walked through the city, briefcase in hand, steps quicker than usual. His mind raced, heart thudding, not from fear, but from belief. For the first time, the firm had seen his vision not as a footnote, but as a possibility. He reached the steps of a small neighborhood law center, one he'd volunteered at during college. The lights were still on. Inside, he He sat with a retired civil rights attorney, Mr. Dupree, 72, black, gentle, but sharp. Marcus laid out the theory. Dupree listened, silent, then leaned back and said, "Son, you're not just arguing law. You're resurrecting ghosts." They spoke for hours, refining language, tightening arguments. "They may try to shut you down," Dupree warned. "Then they better be ready for a fight," Marcus said. The law had always belonged to the powerful. But tonight it bent toward something else, truth. Angela pulled Marcus aside into her office, her tone sharp, eyes focused. "You need to see something," she said. On her desk sat a sealed manila envelope. This was left anonymously. Inside were internal documents, emails, scanned memos, and confidential case summaries. Marcus sifted through them, frowning. At the center, a case from 5 years ago involving wrongful eviction and systemic housing discrimination. His legal theory mirrored it too closely. "This was buried," Angela said. "Never filed. They settled in secret. Guess who led it?" Marcus scanned the signature line. Robert Hensley. Rage bloomed in his chest. The same man who laughed in his face had once pursued the same idea, and chose silence over justice. "He knew," Marcus whispered. "He knew it could win." Angela nodded. "And he shut it down because it threatened the firm's biggest real estate client." The laughter in the boardroom, Marcus realized, wasn't ignorance, it was fear in disguise. In the firm's digital archives room, Marcus and Priya huddled at a terminal, combing through old records. The buried case, labeled only by docket number, had no official outcome, no public record. "It's like it vanished," Priya muttered. Marcus typed faster, digging deeper. Then they found it. A restricted internal note. It referenced a settlement under NDA, brokered by Hensley, and marked client conflict, do not pursue. Marcus leaned back in his chair, breathing hard. "He silenced justice to keep a donor happy," Priya said. "That's not just unethical. It's criminal." They printed everything. Marcus stared at the pages. This wasn't just about his idea anymore. It was about exposing what the system was willing to erase. The theory Hensley mocked wasn't radical. It was resurrected. "We're not just fighting a case," Marcus said. "We're unearthing a cover-up." And now, the stakes were no longer professional, they were moral. Marcus stood in his apartment, papers pinned across the wall like a crime board. Strings connected dates, names, settlements, and footnotes. He read the emails again, each one confirming that the firm led by Hensley had actively buried evidence. His hands trembled. He wasn't just a voice with an idea now. He was a witness to corruption. He recorded another memo on his phone, voice tight. "They knew it mattered. They chose silence. But I want." Just then, a text from Angela lit his phone. "Need to talk." "Not on company devices." Marcus stared at the wall. This was bigger than him. Bigger than just a courtroom argument. Kanye. This was a reckoning. The very floor the firm stood on was cracking, and he'd lit the fuse. He grabbed his satchel, slid the files inside, and looked one last time at the wall. "Let's bring it down," he said to no one but himself. Angela met Marcus at a quiet city park after sunset, their breath visible in the chilled air. She handed him a USB drive. "This has everything from my archive. Audio notes, drafts, internal communications." Marcus tucked it into his coat. "What are you risking?" he asked. She looked away, then back. "Everything." Her eyes were tired, but fierce. "I came here to fight for justice. Somewhere along the way, I started protecting power instead." Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. She exhaled deeply. "But you reminded me who I used to be." The park lights flickered above them. In the distance, the city hummed. Angela turned to leave, then paused. "If this goes public, you'll need protection." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then, I better make it worth it." The battle had become war, and the players were no longer hiding. They were choosing sides. Marcus sat in the firm's mock courtroom alone, darkness broken only by the overhead spotlight. He stood before the empty judge's bench, rehearsing his argument. The law does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people it protects, he said aloud. He paced slowly, voice louder. You silenced a case that could have changed lives, but we are here now, and we won't be ignored. Each word echoed against the mahogany walls like a warning shot. His phone buzzed with a new message, subpoena request approved. His breath caught. The case was moving. The real fight was no longer hypothetical. He straightened his posture, gaze fixed on the invisible jury. Let the record show, he said, voice calm now. This began with a laugh. It ends with justice. Behind him, the firm slept. But inside this courtroom, Marcus was wide awake and unbreakable. The courtroom buzzed with tension as people filled the pews. Legal observers, local press, former clients, and law students sat shoulder to shoulder. At the center stood Marcus, 24, suited, calm, but lightning flickered behind his eyes. Across the aisle, Hensley entered, smirking, flanked by a legal team in tailored black suits. He didn't look worried. He looked insulted. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The case was officially in session. Marcus sat beside Angela, fingers steepled under his chin. Are you ready? She asked quietly. I've been ready since the day they laughed, Marcus replied. The court clerk called the case. Marcus stood, walked slowly to the lectern. He looked out, not at the judge, but at the crowd. Before we begin, he said, voice steady, let the record reflect that this case isn't about ambition. It's about accountability. And with that, the storm began. Marcus moved through his opening arguments with clinical precision, layering historical precedent with emotional weight. He invoked Shelley Vath Kramer, Brown v. Board, and the hidden memo Hensley had tried to bury. The courtroom held its breath. Every pause was calculated. Every line delivered like a scalpel. When he showed the jury the settlement documents labeled, "Do not pursue," a gasp rippled across the room. Angela's eyes never left the jury. She watched their faces change, from neutral to curious to angry. Hensley shifted in his seat, tapping his pen too fast. His smirk had faded. This was never about radical theory, Marcus said, pointing to the screen. It was about choosing profit over people, silence over justice. One juror, an older black woman, nodded slowly. Marcus locked eyes with her. They both understood. This wasn't just law. This was legacy. Hensley rose to speak, voice cold, dismissive. We're being lectured by someone who's never argued a real case, he began, throwing a condescending glance at Marcus. He tried to twist the narrative, suggested Marcus was exploiting emotion, not law, but his confidence cracked. When cross-examination began, Marcus didn't flinch. He presented the email Hensley had authored, instructing associates to drop the housing case. Do you deny writing this? Marcus asked. Hensley's lips tightened. I don't recall. Marcus leaned in. Then let's refresh your memory. The court fell silent as the audio memo from Angela played. Hensley's voice echoed, We can't jeopardize the client. Kill the case. The jury stared. The judge narrowed her eyes. Hensley froze. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was exposure. And the emperor had no clothes. Angela delivered closing arguments, her voice razor-sharp, every syllable drenched in conviction. The law was never meant to serve the loudest voice, but the quietest cries, she said. She turned toward Marcus briefly, a subtle nod of respect passing between them. Then she turned back to the jury. You've seen the truth. You've seen the choice they made. Now you have one too. The room was still, hanging on every word. Marcus sat, staring ahead, silent now. He had carried the torch to the line. She was bringing it across. Hensley stared down at the table, scribbling notes that meant nothing anymore. The judge gave final instructions. The jury rose and exited. Every second dragged. Marcus closed his eyes, hearing his mother's voice again, They'll try to bury you, just make sure they plant you. And he had. Rooted deep. Now came the harvest. The jury returned. 12 solemn faces. The foreperson stood. On the matter of systemic negligence and willful suppression of legal duty, we find in favor of the plaintiff. A hush fell. Then a collective exhale. Marcus didn't smile. He just breathed. Hensley sat motionless, stunned. Angela placed a hand on Marcus's back. The courtroom buzzed, but he heard none of it. His ears filled only with silence, the kind that followed storms. Outside, press cameras flashed. Reporters called his name. But Marcus stepped into the sunlight like he'd done it 1,000 times. "What do you call this win?" one shouted. Marcus paused, then replied, "Justice overdue." The world finally saw him, not as a token, not as a joke, but as a force. And for the first time, the law bowed to the truth he carried. News of the case spread fast. Headlines called it a landmark decision. Others simply called it impossible. At the firm, the atmosphere had shifted. Marcus walked through the halls with quiet dignity. No applause. No parade. But every glance was different. Some averted, some filled with awe. Even the interns looked at him like a legend. Hensley's office was emptied, just a nameplate left behind, half unscrewed. The man who once ruled the floor with sarcasm and scorn had vanished, his silence now louder than any of his old mockery. Angela met Marcus by the elevator. "They're offering you a junior associate position," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Because they want me, or because they can't stop me?" Angela didn't answer. She didn't have to. "Take it," she finally said. "But only if it's still your battlefield." He looked down the hall, then back at her. "Not my battlefield," he said. "My blueprint." In the same conference room where he was once mocked, Marcus now stood at the head of the table, this time leading a discussion. A diverse group of interns, law clerks, and junior associates filled the seats, listening as he broke down his case methodically. "This theory started on a rooftop and in an empty law library," he told them. Not with applause, with questions. Every eye was locked on him. He drew lines on the whiteboard, but the real lesson was in his tone, in the refusal to dilute truth for comfort. One intern raised her hand. "What do you do when they laugh?" Marcus smiled gently. "Document it. Then bury them in evidence." Laughter rippled, but it was different now. Not cruel. Empowered. The same walls that once humiliated him now echoed with clarity. His voice. His rules. Marcus visited his grandmother's house that weekend. Modest, sunlit, and filled with the smell of Sunday cooking. Miss Lillian stood at the door, arms crossed, lips tight until he stepped through. Then she pulled him into the kind of hug that makes history dissolve. "I saw you," she whispered. "On TV. They said you changed the law." Marcus chuckled softly. "I just reminded it who it was meant to serve." They sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea, as neighbors passed and waved. "People calling you a hero now," she said. "Let them," he replied. "But I'll still take out your trash." She laughed, wiping her eyes. The news may have given him headlines. The firm may have given him a title. But here, he wasn't a victory. He was family. And that meant more than any courtroom. Back in his apartment, Marcus sat at his desk, recording another video diary, like the ones he made before the case broke. But this time, his voice was lighter. Day 120, the fight's not over. But today, it's quiet. He paused. Then, smiled. "And I'll take that." Behind him, the wall once cluttered with chaos was now organized. Taped verdicts, highlighted headlines, and framed handwritten notes from law students across the country. "You helped me see the law could be more than a weapon," one note read. He looked into the lens. "If you're watching this, wondering if your voice matters, start writing. Start studying. Start showing up, then don't stop." He ended the recording. Not for views. Not for clout, but because legacy is documented in real time by those willing to speak even when no one listens. Marcus walked the courthouse steps one more time, this time alone. No cameras. No press. Just early morning fog, and the quiet thud of his shoes on stone. He stood at the entrance, staring up at the building. It looked smaller now. Or maybe he'd grown. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. A printout of his theory's official reference in case law.I. He smiled faintly, tucked it away, and stepped inside. Not as a guest. Not as a kid hoping to be heard, but as a force, ready to advocate, to defend, to rewrite the rules they once used to silence him. The law didn't change overnight, but someone like him inside it? That changed everything. And as the doors closed behind him, the legacy he carried, rooted, earned, unshakable, walked with him. Months later, Marcus stood backstage in a packed law school auditorium. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, the same navy blue one he wore on the day he was mocked. Outside, students filled the seats, murmuring with anticipation. A student host peeked in. "Mr. Brooks, you're up." Marcus nodded, stepping toward the light. As he entered the stage, the room erupted in applause. He stood behind the podium, scanning the eager faces. Young minds. Future voices. He tapped the mic once, waited for silence. "I was told once that my ideas were laughable," he began. "That I didn't understand how the law works, but maybe they didn't understand how change begins." He paused, letting it sink in. Not with applause, with resistance. The students leaned forward, the air thick with meaning. This was no lecture. It was a transfer of fire. Marcus walked the audience through the buried case, the theory he resurrected, and the cost of truth. He didn't sugarcoat it. You will be dismissed, mocked. Some of you already have been, he said, scanning the room. The system doesn't fear bad law. It fears bold law, the kind that demands we confront who benefits and whose silence. Silence followed. Then came pens scribbling, thumbs typing, eyes blinking faster to hold back tears. A young woman in the front row whispered, "He's talking about us." He nodded, as if hearing her. "Never ask permission to fight for what's right," Marcus said. "And if the room laughs, make sure they remember what happened after." Thunderous applause. Not for celebrity, for courage. The kind they all hoped they had, and now believed they might. After the event, a line of students formed to shake his hand. Some asked questions. Others just said thank you. One young black man first year stood last in line. "They told me I'd have to lose myself to make it here," he said quietly. "But you showed me I don't." Marcus shook his hand firmly. Don't ever lose what makes them uncomfortable. That's usually the part that changes the room. The student nodded, tearing up. Angela watched from the back of the room, arms crossed, proud but silent. Legacy, Marcus realized, wasn't made in headlines. It was passed hand to hand, voice to voice. The impact didn't echo, it multiplied. And tonight, it had begun again. With one room, one spark, and one belief, that truth, spoken boldly, always finds its mark. Later that night, Marcus returned to the rooftop where it all began. The city stretched beneath him, lights blinking like distant applause. He pulled out his notebook, the same one with worn edges, filled with notes, victories, and battle scars. He flipped to the first page, where the words "Equal Protection Theory, Alternate Path" were scrawled in tired handwriting. Below it he wrote, "Established, referenced, cited, new." He stared at the stars overhead and whispered, "We did it, Ma." A breeze rolled past, rustling the pages. There was peace now, but not rest. He closed the book and looked out over the skyline. He hadn't just changed a case. He had shifted the ground beneath it, and the ground was still shaking. The next morning the old conference room sat quiet, empty but for light streaming in through the blinds. A janitor dusted the table. On the far end sat a copy of Marcus's published legal article, left open to the final paragraph. What was once ridiculed is now precedent. Let the record show. Laughter is not a verdict. Truth always outlives the echo. The camera slowly pans from the book to the chair Marcus once stood in. Empty now, but never silent again. The seat once used to mock had become sacred. A place where someone once small rewrote what was possible. Fade to black. And in the dark, a single line appears. They laughed. He changed the law.